Revenge with Anjo.
When Margaret Ellis stepped into her dining room that Sunday evening, every voice fell silent. The scent of roasted lamb lingered in the air, glasses paused mid-toast, and all eyes turned to her. The bruise beneath her right eye glowed faintly against her pale skin. She was 68 that day, her birthday. Her son, Oliver, stood at the head of the table beside his polished wife, Serena. "Mum," he said lightly, "you should have learned by now not to argue." The guests laughed uncertainly. Margaret's hand trembled against her wine glass. She felt the room shift, not with celebration, but with shame. When Serena first came into Margaret's life, she seemed harmless enough. She had soft brown hair, an easy smile, and a perfume that filled every room she entered. "Mrs. Ellis," she said sweetly the first day they met, offering Margaret a bouquet of lilies. "Oliver talks about you all the time." Her tone was warm, but her eyes flickered with something colder, something watchful. Margaret brushed it off as nerves. She wanted to believe her son had found happiness again, and if Serena brought that, then she would learn to love her too. In the beginning, everything seemed pleasant. Serena offered to help redecorate the house, saying it felt a little dated. "A fresh start will lift everyone's mood," she'd say, with a cheerful grin. Oliver nodded eagerly. "That's not a bad idea, Mum." Within weeks, the lace curtains Margaret had chosen with David were gone, replaced by thick gray blinds. The floral sofa disappeared too, swapped for something sleek and cold. "Minimalism is cleaner," Serena said when Margaret asked. "You'll see, it'll feel good." But it didn't. It felt like the house was being erased, one memory at a time. Margaret tried to adjust. She told herself change was part of life, that Oliver deserved the chance to build something new. But each day, she noticed Serena's influence spreading, her voice filling rooms, her perfume clinging to everything, her opinions slipping into every conversation. One afternoon, Margaret found David's old gardening books boxed up in the garage. "Why are these here?" she asked. Serena smiled lightly. "Oh, those old things? I thought we could make space for something more modern." Margaret bit her tongue, afraid that defending the past might push her son further away. By spring, the laughter in the house no longer belonged to Margaret. Serena began hosting dinner parties for her work colleagues, young professionals with loud voices and polished laughter. Margaret would stay in her bedroom, listening to music upstairs as the sounds drifted through the floorboards. Sometimes, she'd come down to fetch tea, only for the room to fall quiet. "Mum, you should rest," Oliver would say softly. "You look tired." She'd smile faintly and retreat, her heart heavy. The house that once felt like home now belonged to someone else. The first real crack came one morning over breakfast. Serena sat at the table scrolling through her phone. "You know, this place is far too big for 3 people," she said casually. "Maybe we should look at something smaller, closer to town." Margaret's spoon froze midair. "This is my home," she replied quietly. Serena smiled, her tone sugary. "Of course, I just meant it's a lot for you to manage." Oliver nodded in agreement. "She's only thinking of you, Mum." Margaret forced a smile, but she saw the way Serena's eyes glimmered when she said it, the way she was already measuring the walls. Weeks turned into months. Margaret's routine shrank to quiet breakfasts, short walks, and evenings alone in her room. The living room, once filled with photos of family holidays, now displayed Serena's abstract art. David's picture had been moved to the upstairs hallway. When Margaret tried to move it back, she found it gone the next morning. "I thought it clashed with the decor," Serena said lightly. Margaret's voice trembled. "That was my husband." Serena's smile was soft, false. "And he'll always be with you, dear. We just don't need his face in every room." One rainy afternoon, Margaret overheard them arguing downstairs. "She'll never leave," Serena said sharply. "You're her only son. She'll guilt you forever." Oliver's voice was quieter. "Serena, please, she's my mother." "Then act like it," Serena snapped. "Do what's best for both of us." Margaret sat frozen on the stairs, her hands shaking. The truth hit her hard. Serena didn't want harmony. She wanted possession. And she'd use love as her weapon. From then on, the tension became unbearable. Serena began correcting everything Margaret did. "You've overwatered the plants again," she'd sigh. "You really shouldn't use so much butter. It's unhealthy." Even the way Margaret folded towels became an issue. "You know, there's a right way to do that," Serena said one morning, neatly refolding them with exaggerated precision. Margaret stood silently, feeling smaller every day, as if her existence were an inconvenience that refused to disappear. Then came the rules. One morning, a printed sheet appeared on the fridge. "Please inform us if you invite visitors," and cooking after 7 p.m. knock before entering the living room. Margaret stared at it in disbelief. "Serena, what is this?" she asked. Serena shrugged, sipping her coffee. "Just boundaries, dear. It keeps things smooth." Oliver avoided her eyes. Margaret felt something inside her crack, not anger yet, just deep, exhausted sadness. The day everything truly changed began like any other. Margaret was ironing when Serena walked into her room without knocking. She picked up a silver photo frame from the dresser, the one showing Margaret, David, and baby Oliver in front of their old bakery. "Sweet," Serena said flatly. "You know, maybe it's time to sell this place. It's wasted space, really." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You mean my home?" Serena smiled. "Ours, technically. Oliver's your heir." Something hot surged in Margaret's chest. "David left it to me," she said firmly. "And no one will take it." Serena's expression hardened. "You can't hold on to everything forever. People get old, Margaret. It's time to let go." Margaret's hand trembled, gripping the iron's handle. "Get out," she whispered. Serena smirked. "You should be careful how you speak to me. Oliver listens to me now." She turned to leave, her perfume trailing like smoke. For the first time, Margaret saw the full shape of her daughter-in-law's cruelty and the weakness of the man she'd raised. That night, Margaret could barely sleep. Her thoughts churned like waves: anger, grief, disbelief. She stared at the ceiling and whispered, "David, what do I do?" The silence that followed felt heavy. By morning, her decision was clear. She would not be pushed out of the life she had built. But she didn't yet realize how cruelly the battle would unfold, or how public her humiliation would be. It was her birthday. Serena insisted on throwing a party, inviting half the neighborhood. "We'll celebrate you properly," she'd said with false cheer. Margaret wanted none of it, but agreed to keep the peace. "It's just dinner," Oliver promised. But when she came down the stairs that evening, the laughter stopped. Every guest turned to look at her. The swelling on her cheek was visible even under makeup. "Goodness, Margaret, what happened?" someone asked softly. Serena's voice cut in before she could answer. "Oh, that? She slipped this morning. I told her to be more careful." A few people nodded awkwardly. Then Oliver added, "Mom has a temper." Serena was just trying to help. His voice was calm, almost proud. Margaret froze, her heart breaking in slow motion. In one sentence, her son had turned her pain into gossip. The room fell silent. Margaret's neighbor, Mrs. Hardy, spoke up. "That's not funny, Oliver." He flushed, defensive. "It's not a joke." But the damage was done. Eyes darted. Whispers began. Margaret stood rooted, the weight of every humiliation crashing down. Then she heard a familiar voice, deep, steady. "That's enough." Everyone turned. It was Edward Shaw, David's old solicitor and friend. "I think it's time a few truths were cleared up," he said, stepping forward with a folder in hand. Serena's smile faltered. "This isn't really the time." "Oh, I think it is," Edward interrupted. "I've been reviewing David's estate." He opened the folder calmly. "Margaret, your late husband left you full ownership of this property. But he also added a protective clause." Serena stiffened. "Clause?" Edward nodded. "If Margaret is ever coerced or mistreated by a family member regarding this home, ownership transfers immediately to the St. Bridget's Trust." Gasps filled the room. Serena's voice shook. "That's ridiculous." Edward's eyes didn't leave her. 3 weeks ago, an appraisal request was made for this property, under your name, Mrs. Ellis. And an inquiry followed about having Margaret declared mentally unfit. Oliver's face drained of color. What? Edward's tone was steady. Both traced your number. The silence was suffocating. Serena tried to laugh, but it came out cracked. This is absurd. Oliver stepped back, his voice trembling. You tried to make my mother look insane? Serena's face twisted. I did it for us, Oliver. You said she's holding us back. Edward shut the folder. David foresaw this. He trusted his wife more than you trusted your own conscience. The crowd murmured, disgusted. Margaret stood still, her hands shaking but her eyes clear. Serena's voice rose, desperate now. You're all blind. She's been manipulating you. No, Oliver said quietly. You did that. His voice cracked, but his conviction held. The truth was out. The perfect image Serena had built was in ruins. The guests began to leave quietly, muttering as they went. Margaret turned away, too numb to cry. By the time the last car left, the house felt like a storm had passed through. Serena stood near the door, pale with rage. You've ruined everything, she hissed at Margaret. You'll regret this. No, Margaret said softly. You will. Edward gathered his papers. Mrs. Ellis, you're fully protected. If they pressure you again, the trust takes over. Serena's composure cracked completely. She shoved past Oliver, snatched her handbag, and stormed out. The door slammed so hard the walls trembled. Oliver stood frozen, staring at the door. Mum, he whispered, his voice breaking. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. Margaret didn't answer right away. The ache in her chest was too deep. You let her turn you against me, she said finally. You believed her over your own mother. He sank to his knees. I'm sorry. I thought I was protecting my marriage. And you destroyed your family instead, she replied quietly. That night, after Edward left, Margaret sat alone by the fireplace. The clock ticked steadily, the house silent once more. She could still hear Serena's voice echoing, still feel the sting of betrayal. Yet beneath the pain was something unexpected. Peace. For the first time in years, the house belonged to her again. The shadows were hers. The silence was hers. The very air felt familiar once more. The next morning, Margaret found Oliver packing a suitcase. I'll stay at a hotel for a while, he said softly. You need space. She nodded. I do. He hesitated, tears pooling in his eyes. I'll make this right somehow. Margaret looked at him, her boy, grown and broken. The first step, she said gently, is learning what love really means. He nodded, unable to speak. When he left, she stood at the window until his car disappeared down Maple Crescent. Days passed in quiet rhythms. Margaret cleaned, cooked simple meals, and opened the windows wide. The air felt lighter, without Serena's perfume clinging to the curtains. One evening, as she watered the garden, Mrs. Hardy walked by. You handled that with grace, she said kindly. I don't know how you stayed so calm. Margaret smiled faintly. Sometimes silence hurts more than shouting. A week later, Oliver called. His voice was softer than she remembered. Mum, I've started therapy. I need to understand how I let it happen. She closed her eyes, a tear sliding down her cheek. That's good, love. Healing begins with truth. For the first time, she heard sincerity in his tone. No excuses, no deflection. Just a son trying to find his way back. Months rolled by. Oliver came by often, bringing groceries or fixing things around the house. He never stayed long, always respectful, always patient. You don't have to keep proving yourself, Margaret told him one afternoon. You're my son. I forgave you already. I just haven't forgotten yet. He smiled faintly. That's fair, Mum. The distance between them began to close, not with words, but with quiet consistency. One spring morning, he brought someone new. Mum, this is Laura, he said shyly. She had kind blue eyes and a nervous smile. It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Ellis. Margaret studied her for a moment, then smiled. Call me Margaret. Laura helped her serve tea, asked about the garden, and listened more than she spoke. There was no performance in her warmth, just honesty. Weeks later, Oliver sat with his mother on the back porch. "Mum," he said, "I've asked Laura to marry me. But before we plan anything, she wants a prenup. She doesn't want a penny that isn't hers." Margaret's lips trembled into a smile. "She sounds like a good woman." "She is," he said quietly. "And I'm going to do better this time." "I believe you," she replied. The wedding was small, held in a garden filled with white tulips. As Oliver read his vows, his voice shook. "I've learned that love without respect isn't love at all, and family without honesty is a prison." Margaret wiped her tears discreetly. The crowd applauded. The past wasn't forgotten, but it was finally at peace. Later that evening, Margaret sat alone beneath the fairy lights, the hum of distant laughter in the air. She looked up at the night sky and whispered, "We did it, David." The stars glimmered faintly, and she imagined his familiar voice saying, "I told you you were stronger than you think." She smiled. For the first time, her heart didn't ache. It rested. Over the next year, life returned to gentle normalcy. Margaret joined a local book club, tended her roses, and even reopened the small bakery she and David once ran, just twice a week for fun. Locals adored her lemon scones. People often said, "You're glowing, Mrs. Ellis." She'd smile knowingly. Peace looks good on everyone. Sometimes Oliver would visit with Laura and their newborn daughter. Margaret would hold the baby close, inhaling that new life scent. "Her name's Grace," Laura said one day. "We thought it suited her." Margaret laughed softly. "It suits all of us, I think." The house that once echoed with tension now rang with gentle laughter again. As evening settled over Maple Crescent, Margaret stood at the window, watching the sunset bathe the red bricks in gold. She thought of everything she'd lost, and everything she'd reclaimed. Not just a house, but her dignity, her strength, and her peace. She whispered into the quiet, "The past may have bruised me, but it didn't break me." Then she turned off the lights, smiling to herself. Peace, she knew now, was the most beautiful revenge of all. To understand how Margaret ended up humiliated in her own home, one had to go back 3 years, to the day she lost her husband, David. They'd been married 44 years, partners in everything from the bakery they ran in town to the old red brick house on Maple Crescent. When he died of a stroke one morning in the garden, the world lost its warmth. Oliver, their only child, moved back in for a while, promising to look after her. "You won't be on your own, Mum," he'd said. She believed him. She always did. If you value stories of respect, dignity, and justice, please subscribe.